Hello and welcome to the info channel. Today we're going to be talking about my top 5 DPS for phase 1. Make sure you like and subscribe. We're almost at that 400 count. I want to thank each and every one of you for supporting this channel. You're really making a dream come true. Now let's get after it. Number 5, the magnificent Arcane Mage. While Arcane Mages were a powerhouse for most of the TBC lifespan, they are still going to be a powerhouse in Wrath of the Lich King. They barely got to this number 5 spot, but there is no doubt that their damage is top of the meters. Single target damage is what Arcane Mages excel at, and this isn't going to be changing. Phase 1 fights are pretty short, and that means you really won't have to worry about your mana. You can just go to town pumping those arcane blasts over and over until you're done. It won't be rare to see an Arcane Mage at the top of those DPS meters, especially with those unfriendly melee fights. But the only downside to your damage is you have absolutely no cleave damage. So it's best just to stick to your jaw-dropping arcane blast. Now, what does an Arcane Mage bring to the raid? Well, all mages bring focus magic, which is a 3% increase to your crit hit on your spells, and after you crit, you gain an additional 3% to hit. Exclusively, Arcane Mages bring Arcane Empowerment, which increases your whole party or raid's damage by a total of 3%. Now, this does not stack with Ferocious Inspiration, which is a Beastmaster Hunter spell, so there's really only one reason to bring it, and Arcane Mage does more damage, and that's why they're in this number 5 spot. Number 4, the Cursed Affliction Warlock. Affliction Warlock has a huge playstyle change going into Wrath of the Lich King. You are no longer going to be that simple budget version of a Destruction Warlock just running around spamming Shoutable. You are now going to be a fully fledged damage over time focused spec. No longer are you going to be a support spec, but you'll actually be at the top of the meters now in phase 1. Affliction Warlock's single target damage is absolutely crazy thanks to your high damaging over time abilities and Drain Soul's new execution. When a target is below 25% health, they take 4 times the amount that they normally do from a Drain Soul. However, AoE and cleave fights is where Affliction Warlocks really start to shine. Thanks to your multi-dotting ability, it's going to be very common to see you at the top of the DPS meters. Now, what does an Affliction Warlock bring to the raid? They bring Curse of Elements. However, it was nerfed going into Wrath of the Lich King, as a Balanced Druid or an Unholy Death Knight can apply it automatically. However, this means our unique ability is now limited to creating health stones and soul stones and summoning, which is not bad at all. Everyone needs that, absolutely. You're just not the utility powerhouse that you once were. But overall, the Affliction Warlock should remain a very solid DPS through the expansion regardless, and that's where they're at the number 4 spot. Number 3, the disease-ridden Unholy Death Knight. Unholy Death Knights are often forgot about in phase 1 due to a lot of people playing Frost Death Knights because they're a little bit flashier, but that doesn't make them weak at all. The opposite is true. The bulk of our damage is actually magic, meaning it bypasses armor, thus we do not care about the lack of armor penetration on the phase 1 gear. Unholy Death Knights bring some amazing AoE and cleave damage on top of their great single target damage. However, we are slightly weaker than a Frost Death Knight in AoE due to our diseases taking a while to get their damage out, and Frost Death Knights have Howling Blast, which is front loaded. Our utility is also slightly weaker than Frost, as we both bring Horn of Winter, but they bring improved Icy Talons, while we bring Ebb and Plague Fever, which is okay, but Balanced Druids automatically bring that and apply it. Unholy Death Knight stays competitive throughout every single phase in Wrath of the Lich King. It eventually outshines Frost during the last couple phases in the ICC. Therefore, if you're looking for a solid melee DPS that's coming in 3rd place on my list that you can play through the whole expansion, Unholy is a great pick. Number 2, the Icy Frost Death Knight. Similar to our number 1 spot, Frost Death Knight's damage is magic, Frost Strike, and Howling Blast. Thus, it bypasses armor, where other melee DPS are held back due to the lack of armor penetration on phase 1 gear. Frost DK can just pump all day, not worrying about the armor. Frost DKs have amazing single target damage, where they slightly fall behind a number 1 spot. However, we have access to a tool that they do not, which is Howling Blast, a cleave ability. This means on cleave type fights where you have 2 or even 3 targets that you should be hitting, you will more than likely be on the top of the DPS meters, even though this is the number 2 spot. Damage isn't the only thing a Frost Death Knight brings to the raid. Their raid utility comes in the form of Horn of Winter, which is a strength and agility buff, and improved Icy Talons, which is a 20% total debuff to an attack speed. Only shamans can bring this, so it makes them very highly desirable. Frost Death Knights stay highly competitive through all phases stages of Wrath of the Lich King, it's not only until Phase 4 where your Unholy counterpart starts to slightly take over and steal the spotlight. However, Frost DKs are absolutely fun to play, and it's a great role for the whole expansion. Number 1. The Poisonous Assassination Rogue. In Phase 1 of Wrath of the Lich King, Assassination Rogues find themselves at the top of those DPS charts, commonly considered to be the best single target damage in the game. And the reason for that is a huge percentage of the Assassination Rogue's damage comes from poisons, just like Deadly Poison and Envenom. And these poisons bypass the enemy's armor. This causes them to be more or less unaffected at all by the scarcity of armor penetration on the Phase 1 equipment. Assassination Rogues don't really have utility compared to the other specs, but they more than make up for it with their raw damage. Particularly in single target fights, Assassination Rogues will always be at the top of the meters unless you're doing something wrong. In addition to that, you get Fan of Knives, which helps you out in your AoE situations, but it's always going to be better to bring a Death Knight for those pure cleave fights. Assassination Rogue does have one drawback. It is usually seen as a temporary spec, as in Phase 1 it does amazing damage, but in Phase 2, Combat Rogue starts to outscale it significantly once you start getting those weapons in War. Besides that, Assassination Rogue is still the number 1 DPS in Phase 1. You should just look for the combat gear as you go. And that's gonna wrap it up for our top 5 DPS in Phase 1. We have the Arcane Mage, the Affliction Warlock, the Unholy Death Knight, the Frost Death Knight, and the Assassination Rogue. All of those are gonna be great classes for Wrath of the Lich King, specifically in Phase 1. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and drop a comment down below. Was there another class that should have been in the top 5? I don't know. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you next time.